Fire types have had kind of a rough experience in competitive Pokemon. They started out terrible in the very early games, and always seemed to get inadvertently punished by the addition of new mechanics to the series. But fire types do have a lot of great advantages, and they have managed to persevere over the years. It's been a roller coaster for fire types throughout the generations, but in the modern games, I would actually say that fire is now one of the best types in the game. This is my personal favorite type in the series, with some of the most wonderfully designed Pokemon of all time to its name. Let's take a look at all the relevant fire types in competitive singles over the years, and how the identity of this type has changed dramatically from game to game. Subscribe to the channel so that we can prevent the fire type horse adjacent Pokemon Ponyta from proposing an all new law to the Horse Council that would increase the required horsepower needed to enter their territory. This is a ploy to further enhance his political position. Thank you. As I said before, folks, fire types had a very rough start in their competitive life in the first generation. 0 fire types are ranked in OU, and it's one of the worst types in Gen 1. They have pretty much no defensive advantages. Burn immunity doesn't really come up. Will-O-Wisp is not a move yet. Some moves have a burn chance, but they're very rare. And fire type also doesn't really have noteworthy resistances. It doesn't even resist ice. That would be pretty good, but it doesn't in Gen 1. Resists fire and grass on top of that, which is just simply not that impactful. Grass type attacks don't really exist. Mega Drain from Exeggutor might be the only one you see, and that's like a fringe option at best. And sometimes you see Fire Blast, like very occasionally. What also sucks about fire types is that when you use a fire type move, it thaws out the enemy's freeze, which can actually be bad for you. You really want to freeze enemies in Gen 1. It's very good to freeze them, because in Gen 1, there's like very limited anti-status mechanics, and also freeze is permanent. At least you can't thaw out yourself. The only way to thaw is to get hit by a fire type move. So if you freeze an enemy, it's basically a bad idea to use your primary stab type from then on, which is kind of unfortunate for fire types. They have a rough time here, but that's not to say they are completely unviable, because Moltres here is actually okay. Moltres is probably the best fire type in Gen 1. It definitely is the best fire type, and it's seen a bit of a rise. It sees some tournament usage here and there. Fire flying is not bad. You can at least come in on ground type moves. That's some sort of entry point. And Moltres has really good stats. It has a really high special stat in particular. And even though it does suck a little bit that fire type moves thaw out your opponent, which can sometimes be bad for you, Fire Blast is still a really good move in Gen 1 because it has a 30% burn chance on it. This is something they would change later, but in Gen 1, Fire Blast is the most reliable way to actually inflict burn. Moltres can be a bit hard to switch in against. Burn really punishes, in particular, enemies like Snorlax. Probably punishes Snorlax the most, and also Tauros. On top of that, Moltres has a decent attack stat and access to Hyper Beam, so this can sometimes be kind of similar to how Zapdos works, where it is a bit of a mixed attacker. Fire Spin is also where Moltres sets itself apart compared to Zapdos and Articuno, who are both fairly similar, like agility mixed sort of attackers, but Fire Spin is like a fire type equivalent of Wrap or Clamp. It's an immobility effect. Prevents the target from moving for 2 to 5 turns. Basically like it has a 100% flinch chance. So Moltres compared to Zapdos and Articuno is the worst defensively, but it does have Fire Spin, which lets you put things into range of like Hyper Beam or even Fire Blast. And that can be useful against like Chansey, Snorlax of course, anything slower than you really. So Moltres has that going for it. Unfortunately, it sucks that Moltres is weak to ice. And it's also not great for Moltres or fire types in general that Starmie has only risen and risen in usage over the years. Starmie has become, the firm number 4 Pokemon in the game behind the 3 big normal types. So that sucks for Moltres, especially because they often run Blizzard and they're way faster. But Moltres is fairly usable. And I think the second best fire type in Gen 1 OU is actually Flareon. You might think it's Charizard, but I feel like I would personally rather run Flareon if I'm going to run a more physically oriented fire type with mixed options like Body Slam. Flareon has pretty good stats actually, 130 base attack, 110 special, and sets itself apart from Moltres with its access to Body Slam, which is one of the best moves in the game, and it actually hits pretty damn hard too. Has a really hard-hitting Hyper Beam as well, and Fire Spin can help you get stuff into range. Can actually threatening Chansey while also threatening to burn incoming switches like Snorlax. This is pretty good. It's obviously difficult to actually get this on the field. It has low base HP. It's threatened by a lot. It hates Starmie and other such things, but it does have some okay traits, you know, it's alright. Charizard also exists, and Charizard sets itself apart from Moltres by having access to Body Slam, kind of like Flareon does, but Charizard is fire. Flying, which has its benefit, you know, it can come in an Earthquake at least, which is some sort of entry point. That's more than can be said for Flareon. Also gets Earthquake for coverage, that's something. That's okay, maybe. Gets Swords Dance, one of the few Pokemon in the game that can get Swords Dance, which can help you with Hyper Beam and Body Slam and such. You can also run Slash, which has a high crit rate. I've learned recently that Swords Dance and Slash is a bad synergy, because if a move crits, it actually ignores your own offensive boost. You learn something new about Gen 1 every single time you talk about it as a Pokemon YouTuber. Believe me, this generation has so many little mechanical quirks. That seems so weird, to ignore your own boosts, but it's true. It's true. So I had a set once that showed Swords Dance Slash on, I think, like Pinsir, and the comments were saying, Jimothy, you're a buffoon. That's an anti-synergy. Forgive me. Forgive me for thinking that something could have the benefit of boosting up. Yeah, this is alright. I think that, like, I would rather use both Moltres or Flareon than this. I think its stats are just really lacking. Swords Dance is probably the most noteworthy thing it has over the other two, because Flareon is a better mixed attacker. It has higher offensive stats. But Swords Dance is something, and it is faster than Flareon with base 100, and Moltres too. It's faster than them. So maybe there's something for Charizard. I think probably not, though, if I'm being honest. And Ninetales is technically the highest ranked fire type, being an UU, while like Moltres is an NU, and the others are a bit lower. But I don't think that this guy is that good in OU compared to Moltres or Flareon, because its stats are not the best. The only real benefit I could find on this guy was Confuse Ray. I mean, that's a decent option in Gen 1. Reflect as well, which the others don't get. These are the only two things, but I don't think these are a great fit. I mean, Confuse Ray is kind of just gambling. I would rather some more consistent options, personally. And Reflect, are you bulky enough to begin with to be getting much out of Reflect? I'm not sure. You're not even Slam Para Immune? It seems like a bad maneuver to go for Reflect. Maybe you can run a Reflect Rest. Ninetales, that's probably the biggest benefit of Ninetales over the others, is Reflect Rest, maybe. Forgive me if I'm disrespecting Ninetales here. Let me know if it does have any other niche use. I mean, sometimes in Gen 1 it's hard to tell, because the niche use is that you live a specific hit from something, and Hyper Beam does precisely enough damage to KO with a crit. Like, Gen 1 niches can get very, very specific, so sometimes I don't know. If you're a Gen 1 genius, let me know. But at a glance, it seems pretty bad. In Gen 2, fire types got a bit better, but they still overall weren't great. There's still no OU ranked fire types, but there are quite a few UUBL ranked fire types, which is more than you can say for Gen 1. And some of these guys have some value here and there. Fire types gained ice resistance in this generation. That was a big benefit. Ice being one of the most common types in the game offensively. The new mechanic of weather was also introduced, so you could create sun, which buffs your fire type attacks, making fire types into pretty alright wall breakers here and there. And the item charcoal also existed. It's only a 10% increase in damage, but back in Gen 2, that's something. You sometimes see like Magnet and Charcoal for that tiny little bit of extra damage, which does make an impact. Speaking of which, Moltres is a pretty decent wall breaker. I think with Sunny Day, Fire Blast, and Charcoal, you can actually break through Snorlax with the amount of damage output. You hit pretty hard. Very few special attackers can actually do such a thing, so that's fun. You also have Rest, Sleep, Talk for a bit more longevity on Moltres. What sucks about Moltres is that it has a bad matchup into Zapdos and Raikou, who are everywhere and just threaten you with big Thunderbolt. But at least if you get Moltres in, it's pretty hard to switch in against Fire Blast. There are some water types running around like Starmie. Luckily for you though, the most common water type in the game, Cloyster, is neutral to fire. It takes a lot from Fire Blast. It's not necessarily mandatory to run a water type or anything, so sometimes Moltres can get really good matchups and be extremely threatening. It's kind of an inconsistent strategy though, because Fire Blast only has 8 PP and it can miss as well, but this is something. This is alright. Fire types getting a bit more identity now, using their typing more offensively. Houndoom was a new Pokemon, a new Dark fire type, Dark being a new type introduced in Gen 2. This is a cool Pokemon. It's got Pursuit and Fire Blast. Tyranitar is generally the superior Pursuit Trapper in Gen 2 OU, but Houndoom could be alright, I imagine. Houndoom is much faster, it has a high special attack, and I think it can more easily switch in against Gengar because it resists ice and grass. It has that going for it. I will say Tyranitar doesn't have too hard of a time switching in against Gengar. So that's not a huge concern for Tyranitar, and it's overall more consistent. It has more to offer. At least another option with a little bit unique traits going for it. Set it apart. That's something. Charizard got access to Belly Drum in Gen 2, which is cool. So it's one of the only Belly Drum users that can actually be a mixed threat, which is actually pretty useful because you can Belly Drum, max out your attack, and still threaten steel types like Skarmory. Skarmory would completely wall you, but the fact that you have Stab Fire Blast off a decent special attack stat, that's relevant. If you really wanted to, you could build around this. It has some fairly solid advantages. Typhlosion can be an alright mixed attacker. I see this on the Gen 2 ladder sometimes. Typhlosion fans are out there. This guy has the exact same stats as Charizard, funnily enough, but it has access to Dynamic Punch, which is nice. You can hit Snorlax with this and Tyranitar and other such fellows. It's inconsistent, obviously, only 50% accuracy, but what if you hit? What if you simply hit? You ever consider that? If you hit with this, it's a great move. It confuses the enemy, then they hit themselves with confusion. I have to admit, I have never seen Entei in a Gen 2 OU game before. Definitely outclassed by its two brothers, Suicune and Raikou, who are OU fellows. This guy got shortchanged compared to his fellow Legendarios. But he's got a decent attack stat. He can also be a bit of a fire type mixed attacker. With the fantastic move Hidden Power Fighting, with a massive base power of 70. Absolutely earth shattering. It's got the Sunny Beam combo. That's more than can be said for some. It can do Fire Blast, wall breaking. I can put Charcoal on it if I want to. I wouldn't use this, but it has traits. It does have qualities to it. It does exist. And of course we have Magcargo, one of the most beautiful creatures ever designed, even outside of the Pokemon franchise. Just a beautiful imaginative. It's a snail made of lava with a rock as a shell. It's genius. It's flavorful. How can you not like this? And competitively, it's outstanding. It is breaking records as we speak. Now, Gen 3 is where fire types actually started to do stuff. They started to be real Pokemon. But it took a while for people to realize this. You'll see in Gen 3 there are two OU ranked fire types, Charizard and Moltres, but it wasn't always like this. These Pokemon fairly recently rose up to OU. It took a while for people to actually understand that they were good Pokemon, and a lot of metagame development had to happen. That being said, a tragedy did happen to the fire type in Gen 3, as is tradition. The introduction to the ability Arena Trap, which made Dugtrio into a metagame force. Dugtrio could trap enemies, and basically anything weak to ground is nerfed as a result of Dugtrio's presence. And that includes fire types. So mono fire types, or those with a ground weakness, whatever their dual type may be, are a little bit disadvantaged. Dugtrio is not used to beat fire types. It usually has other targets, but just by fire types existing, they're caught in the crossfire of Dugtrio being a central force. Dugtrio can take advantage of a fire type anytime it sees one. Unfortunate for them. But over time in Gen 3 OU, people realized, wait a sec, the fire flying typing is actually amazing. This is incredible. This is a world before Stealth Rock, so you don't have to worry about losing half of your health when you enter, of course. Spikes are the central mechanic of Gen 3. They got a big buff, allowing them to be stacked. Spikes were relevant back in Gen 2 as well, but you could only make one layer of spikes back then. Now you can make 3 layers of spikes. So flying grants that imperative immunity to spikes, and you can dodge Dugtrio's Arena Trap, plus you're immune to ground. Another great benefit of fire typing in Gen 3 was immunity to burn, which in previous generations wasn't as relevant, but now it was because Will-O-Wisp is a move that exists. Will-O-Wisp directly inflicts burn, and fire types are immune to that. That has real legitimate practical application, and that would go on to be one of the best traits of the fire types moving forward. Now that Will-O-Wisp became a move, and one of the best status moves available, even to this day. It's also great that more fire types got access to the move Will-O-Wisp. That was a buff for them. And the single fire type that exemplifies and takes advantage of all these fantastic qualities the most is Moltres. Fire flying typing being the perfect dual combo for a fire type. It has the burn immunity, it has the ground immunity, the spike immunity. It is a fantastic wall breaker and offensive threat. Steel resistance is also more important in Gen 3 than it was before. Steel type attacks weren't really much of a thing in Gen 2. But in Gen 3, Metagross is a central threat, and Meteor Mash is one of the most spammable moves in the game, famously difficult to switch in against. It's commonly paired with Magneton to eliminate that pesky Skarmory, letting Meteor Mash hit even more things. But Moltres is one of the only things in the game that can switch directly into a Metagross Meteor Mash and completely turn the momentum back into its favor. You directly threaten the Metagross in front of you and you shrug off the Meteor Mash for the most part. You actually take quite a bit from banned Meteor Mash, but the momentum you generate is enough. Moltres is bulky enough to take those hits and turn it into offensive pressure, which is what you want a wall breaker type Pokemon to do. Will-O-Wisp is also a great move to use against common switch-ins, like an incoming Snorlax trying to tank a special hit is now completely crippled by Will-O-Wisp. Or a water type, like Suicune trying to come in and resist fire, also gets pretty shut down by Will-O-Wisp. Now they have to rest or something. With max special attack, off the basis of this incredible stat, and with Hidden Power Grass for coverage, you can also actually do pretty good damage to water types coming in, especially with Spikes for support. A Moltres with the support of Spikes is an incredibly scary thing. Not even Blissey loves to come in. Blissey is another thing you can really pressure with Will-O-Wisp, racking up that residual damage. Roar is also a way to punish Blissey. As they switch in, take Spike's damage, and they're forced out again, you're probably threatening something else, and now they're in a bit of a pickle. Moltres is also great against Celebi, who is a very common Pokemon that you need to have some sort of plan against. Moltres can come in and directly threaten it, much like it can against Metagross. So Moltres is a great fit in the metagame, and it's a fantastic Pokemon. Has common entry points, common ways to generate value, and it can stick around because of its Spike immunity and its natural bulk. Another fantastic option on Moltres is Overheat, one of the few high base power moves you can get in Gen 3. These are pretty rare. You know, if you've Spike chipped a Blissey enough or a Snorlax enough over the course of a game, you can bring them into that Overheat range and finish them off as a long-term plan to eliminate them. I'm a big fan of Moltres, folks, in Gen 3 OU. It's at the peak of its power here. Charizard is the second most popular and most powerful fire type in OU. And it's very similar to Moltres, same typing, similar offensive capabilities, but the difference maker with Charizard is that while it's not as bulky and it's not as specially powerful in terms of special attack, it has a higher speed stat and it has powerful mixed attacking options. Most significantly, it has the Substitute Focus Punch combo, which can more directly threaten Blissey. Moltres can pressure Blissey just with Spikes for support and roaring it out and bringing it low over the long-term course of a game, but Charizard doesn't actually need Spikes to be threatening to Blissey and other special walls like Snorlax because of this sub-Focus Punch combo. And Focus Punch is a massive base power. You don't even really need much attack to actually make good use of this move. Charizard is a little bit more self-sufficient as a threat compared to Moltres. Moltres does need Spikes most of the time to be an effective threat against those, water types and special walls that can answer it. But Charizard threatens a wider array of things thanks to its access to Focus Punch. Focus Punch can also be used predictively if you want to go like Dragon Claw as a way to hit Salamence and Flygon. Instead, Focus Punch can be just used raw and used on predicts, like a Blissey coming in on a Fire Blast, what they think is a Fire Blast, you predict that and Focus Punch them. Another cool option that Charizard has is Beat Up, which is a weird move in Gen 3 that is actually typeless and it deals damage based on the enemy's base defense stat and the base attack stats of your entire team. So it doesn't factor in EVs or natures, and for that reason, Beat Up actually deals a huge amount of damage to Blissey specifically without you needing to invest in any attack. So it's commonly used specifically to hit Blissey, which is interesting. Very weird move, but it's not a dark type attack, it is a typeless physical attack. And also your allies need to be alive and they need to be non-statist for the multi-hit to take effect. But this is a really good option that directly hits Blissey really hard without needing to substitute or, risk Focus Punch mind games. You can just directly do like 70% to Blissey, which is enormous. That's really, really good. And Charizard can single-handedly just dismantle the common Skarmory, Blissey, Swampert type defensive cores on its own sometimes. So really, really threatening. Compared to Moltres though, it's not as bulky, so it is a bit worse at coming in against those Metagross Meteor Mashes. And it also struggles a little bit at threatening water types compared to Moltres. Moltres has a higher special attack, hits them better with Hidden Power Grass, but like Melodic or Suicune can kind of shrug off Charizard's Hidden Power Grass. So that's where Moltres has it beat. Moltres also has Will-O-Wisp while Charizard doesn't. So those are the trade-offs between Moltres and Charizard. Overall pretty similar, but they have these distinct little advantages among them. And I gotta say, Charizard in Gen 3 OU is one of the most fun and cool Pokemon to use ever in any OU format, in my opinion. I love using this. I think it's such a fun and healthy presence in the format. You can game with it. You can do Focus Punch predicts or mix and match the options on the sets pretty nicely. It's so fun. It's such a cool Pokemon all around. Now, Blaziken is an interesting one. Blaziken can be alright in Gen 3 OU despite the fact that it has a worse typing than Moltres or Charizard, and it's vulnerable to ground type moves and Dugtrio traps. The advantage of Blaziken is the offensive firefighting type combination, which grants fantastic same type attack bonuses. Firefighting is an amazing combo that threatens Skarmory, Blissey, and Tyranitar, the three kings of the metagame, all at once. Other mixed attackers are such options as, Salamence, who is dragon flying, and it has fire fighting coverage of its own, but they're not stab boosted. You can't quite one-hit Tyranitar, and you don't actually do that much to Blissey with Brick Break if you're invested in special attack. A Salamence Brick Break on a mixed set deals like 40 to Blissey, and they threaten Ice Beam, but Blaziken is way more directly threatening. It can one-hit KO Tyranitar straight up, one-hit KO Skarmory, and deal well over half to Blissey as well. A hidden power type for coverage, like Grass for Swampert or Ice for an incoming Salamence or Flygon. Blaziken can be an explosive opener. It's really good as a lead, because if you just lead with a guy, you can use it immediately. You don't have to switch it in later. So that kind of sidesteps the issue of Blaziken being more lacking in the defensive department, where Charizard and Moltres have more entry points on the field. Blaziken suffers from Spike's Chip, ground weakness, and other such things. But if you lead with the guy, it also hits common leads. Skarmory, Metagross, and of course Tyranitar are common leads. You got a decent amount of set variety on Blaziken too. HP Ice is really cool because Salamence is such a common switch into Blaziken, thinking that you have HP Grass. If you do have HP Grass, Salamence kind of destroys you because it comes in, it's fast, it threatens flying. But HP Ice is such a cool way to lure them in and just defeat them instantaneously. Focus Punch can also be great as a big neutral hit on something like Swampert coming in or Melodic coming in, because you can kind of suck against water types, but with Focus Punch, you can remedy that just with big fighting type stab. Enormous damage from that. Thunder Punch is cool too to hit incoming water types. It doesn't hit them that hard, especially stuff like Melodic or Suicune that are pretty bulky, but an incoming offensive Starmie can get pretty chunked by Thunder Punch, and you do hit Gyarados really hard with Thunder Punch too, so solid option. I also like Toxic. I think Toxic is a cool mid-ground to just cover a lot of possible switch-ins, especially early game when you lack info. A lot of things could come in on Blaziken. Gyarados, Salamence, Melodic, Suicune, Swampert, various things could. You don't have that much info on their set. So if you're running Thunder Punch hits specific things, but it sucks against others. Same with Focus Punch. But Toxic can kind of cover all of them, whatever they may be. So Toxic can be a good fit on these kind of mixed threats for that reason. Definitely an inconsistent Pokemon that kind of relies on good lead matchups and sucks a little bit at getting mid-game value, but in the right situation, Blaziken can really start things off very aggressively and be very difficult to answer. Houndoom is another interesting one. Houndoom got buffed in Gen 3 with the new abilities Early Bird and Flash Fire, and I think Flash Fire is the much more popular one, which grants a complete immunity to fire type damage and buffs your fire type attacks by 1.5 times if you're hit by a fire type move. So really good to just have a straight up immunity that also buffs you. Houndoom is a great Pokemon in a world where Gengar is so common, and eliminating Gengar is something you can build around. Houndoom can switch in against Gengar pretty well. It does kind of suck against just neutral Thunderbolt. Tyranitar is once again the more popular pursuit user in Gen 3 just because it's bulkier and it can come in against more things. But with some team support, like maybe you have teammates that bait the enemy to HP Grass or Will-O-Wisp against you, which gives Houndoom a nice entry point against Gengar. From there, you can Pursuit Trap them, eliminate their Gengar, and enable teammates like fighting types or rapid spinners or what have you that love to have Gengar eliminated. What's also cool about Houndoom compared to Tyranitar is it is a fast threat that also has a good matchup against some new faces, Celebi and Jirachi. Celebi was not OU back in Gen 2, it was Ubers, and Jirachi is a new Pokemon. And both of them rely on Psychic Stab and can't really touch Houndoom much. They don't have good coverage to hit Houndoom, but Houndoom can come in, often outrun them, and hit them with both of its stab types too. The Houndoom can help not only against those two psychic types, not only against Gengar, but also help against fire types, enemy fire types like Moltres and Charizard. You can come in on their fire type moves, and honestly, you can just hit them with a big Flash Fire stab boosted Fire Blast and kind of take advantage of them to just become a pretty monstrous threat on your own merits. So Houndoom's cool. Really great players like H-Clat love to use Houndoom, even in high-stakes situations like tournaments with money on the line. H-Clat has used Houndoom to great success. Can be a fantastic Pokemon on the right team. Now, Camerupt is a Pokemon that I have immense respect for. This is an honest and hard-working Pokemon. Camerupt is very cool. Because it's Fire Ground, it is a fantastic switch-in to Gengar and to Zapdos and Jolteon. It is immune to Electric. It is neutral to Ice, shrugging off the damage. Neutral to Grass as well, and it is immune to burn. So this allows it entry points against all of these fellows who use Electric, Ice, and Grass as their primary coverage options. And of course, Will-O-Wisp on Gengar. Camerupt also has the ability Magma Armor, granting an immunity to freeze in case the Ice Punch randomly freezes. That's not even going to get Camerupt. Of course it would. He is above that kind of nonsense. And when Camerupt hits the field, he is kind of a threat. I mean, the stats aren't outstanding, but Stab Fire Blast, Stab Earthquake, your offenses are good enough to be pretty difficult to switch in against. And Explosion is the big one. Explosion allows you to trade with something important, or just threaten the possibility of exploding and put that fear in your enemy's mind that they might lose something like, I don't know, an incoming Salamence or something like that, an incoming Flygon, which is an important defensive fellow. Much like Blaziken with Toxic, Camerupt with Toxic is cool because it hits a lot of the common switch-ins, but you can also go, you know, Hidden Power Grass, absolutely destroy an incoming Swampert. Hidden Power Ice hits incoming Salamence and Flygon, and guess what? You also get Overheat, which can be a great option too. What a beautiful Pokemon all around, inside and out. And Flareon deserves a little shout out. It's not the best, it definitely is tough to build with and doesn't fit on that many teams, but it can be an okay Gengar switch in with its high special defense stat that also covers mixed threats like mixed Salamence and such like that, and enemy fire types too. It's unique as a special wall with wish support that can handle that selection of enemies. Nothing else can really handle, you know, mixed Salamence, Gengar, and also Moltres and Charizard all in one. So that has its value, can be good alongside like Forretress, who can struggle in those matchups. It is rough though because you're weak to Dugtrio, that's the big thing. But you can support Flareon with Porygon 2 maybe. And you don't need me to tell you about Magcargo at this point. You should understand that Magcargo is the greatest to ever. I don't even need to explain myself. I think I'm realizing that one of the things I appreciate most about Gen 3OU is its lovely selection of fire types. I love the fire type, and fire type feels really satisfying to use in Gen 3. It really plays to its strengths. The Dug weakness is unfortunate, but it's not as bad as something we'll talk about in a moment. The other crippling weakness for fire types that came later. You can overcome some Dug weakness, and look at all these viable Pokemon that are weak to Dug, but have a place anyway. They can be supported by Dug punishes like Salamence and Skarmory, or just Porygon 2 to eliminate Dug, and that can be valid. Top players have used that. You see Camerupt, Houndoom, and Blaziken in high-level play occasionally. But despite getting that inadvertent nerf from the presence of Dugtrio Arena Trap, fire types can function here pretty well. And Moltres and Charizard are definitely standouts in that department. Fantastic Pokemon. In Gen 4, we all know what happened. Stealth Rock came out, which punished fire types for no good reason. Did they deserve it? I don't think so. But regardless, that's the new reality we lived in from Gen 4 onwards. So it should come as no surprise that the two OU ranked fire types are both neutral to rock thanks to their secondary typing, because that's what you need to be able to function now. However, Gen 4 saw the release of perhaps the king of competitive fire types from now until the end of time. Heatran, the legendary Heatran, an outstanding competitive Pokemon. Its incredible utility, Fire Steel typing along with Flash Fire, which is a fantastic combination of defensive traits. And it's also a fantastic bulky attacker with a whopping 130 special attack. And respectable speed considering its defensive advantages. Overall, a Pokemon that seems like it was made for competitive. And it's a beautifully designed Pokemon. I really enjoy Heatran. I think everything about it is well considered. It's got that crippling ×4 weakness to ground, weakness to water, making it exploitable. It has no reliable healing, but it represents a nice set of defensive advantages that have their uses in most battles. It's a really easy Pokemon to fit on teams that provides valuable utility and a bit of offensive firepower. It keeps stall in check with sets like Magma Storm Taunt. It can run a lot of different sets. You can mix and match its EVs, go in a more aggressive direction, go more bulky, substitute sets, go Lava Plume, Spread Burn, in a balanced way, because Lava Plume has enough counterplay to not feel too annoying to switch in on. Overall, lovely Pokemon. And it has Explosion too in Gen 4, as an extraneous option if you want. Also fits very well in a metagame dominated by both Jirachi and Latias. Especially Jirachi. Heatran is one of the things that really keeps Jirachi in check. Otherwise that Iron Head flinch would just run away with things. You ×4 resist that, completely shrugging it off, and you obviously directly threaten them with huge stab fire damage. You can take advantage of Jirachi to set up rocks and get your Magma Storm stuff going, or sub up and start really making a name for yourself. And Infernape is yet another wonderful Pokemon design. I love this guy. This was like my first favorite competitive Pokemon when I got into it when Gen 5 was current, but I went back and played Gen 4 and I really enjoyed using Infernape in the Gen 4 OU metagame on Pokemon Online. This guy feels like it was designed to take advantage of the physical special split, since it has evenly distributed attack and special attack, and options on both sides of the spectrum. You got Overheat as a big special attack or flamethrower. You got Flare Blitz for physical versions. You got Close Combat, Focus Blast. You have a lot of set variety on this guy, a lot of coverage options. High speed, versatile, overall just a cool, fun Pokemon, a great presence. I did speak recently about Empoleon and how Empoleon over time overtook Infernape in popularity and success, but Infernape still has a lot going for it. There's been a little bit of an Infernape resurgence, I think, even in Gen 4. People returning to Infernape to punish common defensive strategies because it is such a fundamentally good Pokemon at just breaking through the enemy's defenses with all of its unique coverage and the ability to pivot as well. It can make Stealth Rock, it has priority. Infernape can really be an asset. And despite the times 4 rock weakness, Moltres can sometimes still be used in Gen 4 or here and there. It's a great switch into Scizor and completely shuts it down. And it has Roost now for a healing move. That's good. So you can do sub-Roost pressure stall stuff. Also switches in on like Breloom and punishes that pretty well. The problem though is that you take half your damn health bar from Stealth Rock if you simply switch in, so you need really solid hazard control. You need a Rapid Spinner. Probably a way to pressure or completely eliminate ghosts as well to make spinning as safe as possible. So it needs a lot of support from teammates now that Stealth Rock is in the game. It can work and it has been used, just not nearly as good as it was in Gen 3, where it was a little bit more self-sufficient and not as threatened by a central mechanic. In Gen 5, the most infamous fire type of all time was released, none other than Volcarona. Despite a ×4 rock weakness, this is one of the few Pokemon with that crippling downside that can function in OU, purely because of how good it is offensively. Volcarona has the move Quiver Dance, one of the best boosts ever put to screen, raising special attack, special defense, and speed by 1, which is unreal. That is absurdly powerful, and Volcarona is a Pokemon that can end games extremely quickly if given a single turn of setup sometimes. Just a single turn and you can just delete the entire enemy team. It's commonly run alongside Starmie in this metagame, a more fast-paced, aggressive Rapid Spinner who can Stealth Rock once, providing the avenue for Volcarona to hit the field, Quiver Dance, and clean things up. And Volcarona is a staple of hyper-offensive teams in this generation. And this is one of the moments where I feel like power creep really started to set in the Pokemon series. Sweepers were never this good before, but in Gen 5, sweepers started to exist that could legitimately win games in the team preview sometimes. Volcarona exemplifies these kinds of skewed matchups and explosive offensive threats that would only become more of a problem over time. Ninetales got the ability Drought in Generation 5, which was a huge buff. Drought obviously creates permanent sun on the field. This is archetype defining. For a very long time, Ninetales was a staple of the format back in the day. When Chlorophyll was legal, sun teams were fantastic with Chlorophyll Venusaur as a teammate, double speed in the sun, setting sleep, solar beaming stuff. But those days are long gone because all of those abilities that grant double speed in the weather are now banned, as they were extremely over-centralizing, to be fair. These days, Sun is not what it once was. There was a brief period where Sun had a little bit of a renaissance, using Dugtrio Arena Trap, and trapping enemy Tyranitar usually, to establish your weather as the dominant weather, and then using Moonlight Cresselia, because Cresselia has increased healing in the Sun with Moonlight. But then Dugtrio was banned too. And now Sun is in a weird spot where it is probably the worst weather effect in the game now, even behind Hail. Even Hail has had quite a lot of usage in top level players, an anti-meta choice. Sun on the other hand has the fundamental issue of your weather setter being rock weak, and many of the Sun synergies that you can take advantage of also being rock weak, which is a big issue. But you do sometimes see Sun teams today. Zato is a good teammate because Zato has Magic Bounce and that can give you some insurance against Stealth Rock. There were a couple instances of Sun being brought to SPL. But in today's metagame, Sun is a shell of its former self. Heatran remains a fantastic choice for many of the same reasons that it was back in Generation 4. It also helps that Heatran really threatens Ferrothorn, a new metagame staple. That's really good. Heatran also benefits from the new item Air Balloon. This is a great new addition for Heatran, granting a temporary ground immunity. This can be nice into Landorus, Therian, and stuff like that. Heatran is commonly seen on sand teams. It is immune to sand, and it can trap stuff with Magma Storm. Heatran with the support of Spikes and Stealth Rock is a nice way to actually break through enemy rain teams, because you're luring in all their water types, Magma Storming them, trapping them for a bit, forcing Spike's chip damage against them. Can be a way to break through Politoed over the course of a game and stuff like that. And once again, a lot of set variety on Heatran in Gen 5 with offensive and defensive options, utility options, still a fantastic Pokemon. Infernape is still ranked OU by technicality, meaning when Gen 5 was current, it was popular enough to be OU by usage. But in the modern metagame, it's definitely not that great. Not very common. The metagame has changed a lot with so many different bans and shifts, and yeah, I don't think Infernape is very good anymore in the modern world. Chandelure is really cool. I don't think it's that good, but I'm a big fan of the design. Ghost Fire, I think this was the first Ghost Fire type, I believe, and has a massive 145 special attack. 2 good abilities, Flame Body and Flash Fire. Fantastic stab types, of course. Maybe you could use this as a spin blocker on some teams, or a sun threat in the occasional sun team. Rock weakness, obviously very damning. A hard sell compared to other ghost types like Jellicent, but I do really appreciate the design of this. Visually, the name is good. All of its traits are really cool. Darmanitan was an interesting new fire type wall breaker. It has a massive 140 base attack and the ability Sheer Force, which grants you 1.3 times damage on certain attacks at the cost of nullifying their secondary effects. So I believe Flare Blitz actually gets the buff because it loses the burn chance in exchange for more damage. So this thing hits harder than almost anything. This is one of the hardest hitting guys ever. The problem though is that you're insanely frail and your biggest move deals a lot of recoil damage to you. So that's a problem. I think this has seen some use on Sun teams on occasion. Kind of a freaky looking guy also. Is he a monkey? I think so. I think that's a monkey. Definitely a fun Pokemon design. A bit flawed though in how it functions in game, but intriguing enough to perhaps see use here and there. And shout out to Victini as well. This is another fire-type wall breaker that would become better later on. In its debut generation was not OU ranked. Victini has one of the most powerful moves ever created, V-Create. A 180 base power move. Kind of ridiculous, but it obviously has a drawback of lowering defense, special defense, and speed. Not that much of a drawback though, it's worth clicking this. It's a fantastic move. And it's got a solid move pull on top of that with U-turn for pivoting, Bolt Strike. Simple 100 across the board in the stats, meaning you can run special attacking options if you like. Victini was in the past one of the reasons to use Sun for that incredible wall breaking potential. A little bit hard to use though, with rock weakness and also just sand setters and rain setters being your absolute worst nightmare. You can hit them on the way in and punish them though, like Brick Break, incoming Tyranitar trying to reset weather, or Bolt Strike, incoming Politoed. With some gaming, you can get some value out of Victini with good predicts. And I almost forgot to mention, Blaziken in Generation 5 became an absolute monster. They gave it the ability Speed Boost, and with that, alongside Protect, it could very easily outrun everything. This became one of the most monstrous sweepers in the entire world, to the point where it actually got banned to Ubers, and this was kind of an insane moment, where a starter Pokemon was considered on the same power level as legendaries. That was unheard of at the time. One of the biggest buffs ever done, giving Blaziken Speed Boost. In Gen 6, there's actually quite a few OU ranked fire type, an impressive 5 of them. Amazing. Without permanent rain existing anymore, or permanent sand, I think that fire types started to have an easier time. And it also helped that some new good fire type designs that were powerful saw release, including Volcanion here. Volcanion is very good. It's a fire water type. It is rock weak, but it has enough advantages to actually offset that rock weakness. This is a rare case of a rock weak fire type thriving. It has solid bulk, a massive special attack stat, and of course the ability Water Absorb, granting more entry points. This provides water immunity and also healing if struck by a water move. This is excellent. Volcanion also has the amazing signature move Steam Eruption, which has a 95 accuracy, 110 power, and the Scald effect of 30% burn. This is one of the freest clicks there is, dealing huge damage. It's like all the upside of Hydro Pump, without the downside of the accuracy, and you get Scald Burn on top of that. Scald was already good with 80 power. With 110 power, imagine that. And this is where much of Volcanion's power stems from, is this very move. Another reason why fire types overall got a lot better in Gen 6 is because of the new addition of Fairy type, which became perhaps the best new type. Certainly in the conversation for best type, you see Fairy types everywhere. And Fire is one of the few types that resists Fairy, which is incredibly valuable. Charizard in Gen 6 also gained the privilege of 2 different Mega forms that are both outstanding in their own way. And because Charizard has 2 different forms, you can disguise which form you are, because they don't know which one you are until you choose to Mega Evolve. That's fun, bit of bluffing potential. Mega Charizard X becomes a Fire Dragon type when it Mega Evolves, and turns into a more physical attacker. Whereas regular old Charizard, more specially lean, has tough claws, which grants a boost to physical attacks. And look at these stats, folks. It's actually evenly matched in both attack and special attack, allowing for mixed options, but most sets take advantage of your fantastic physical attacking move pool and the Tough Claws ability. You have Dragon Dance, Flare Blitz, and Dragon Claw, along with Roost. Even though Charizard is ×4 Rock Weak in its base form, which is usually damning, Charizard Mega X is good enough to offset that damning weakness, isn't it? Mega Charizard Y is the more special attack oriented of the two, with the ability Drought, which sets Sun on the field. Drought was nerfed in Gen 6, it's no longer permanent like it was in previous generations. However, Mega Charizard Y can make fantastic use of Drought, with an immediate boost to its fire type attacks, and the immediate ability to use Solar Beam right off the bat. Mega Charizard Y has an unbelievable 159 special attack, and it honestly a serviceable attack stat. I've seen some sets run Earthquake as mixed coverage, especially to hit Heatran, because Focus Blast is inconsistent, it's inaccurate. Earthquake is 100% accurate, and it hits Heatran for massive damage. So that's something I used to see back in the day. You really do need a lot of help to overcome Rock Weakness. This is what you need. This amount of special attack and like one of the best abilities in the game. And then you can do it. Then you can be Rock Weak and exist in OU. This is what it requires, folks. No surprise that Heatran is still OU in Gen 6 and a relevant force. Made even better by the fact that fairies now exist and you resist them ×4. Plus you can threaten them with good old Flash Cannon for stab damage if you want. That's a bit of a new way to use Heatran. And of course, who could forget Talonflame? Yet another ×4 Rock Weak Pokemon ranked in OU. How did it do such a thing? Well, it has the ability Gale Wings, granting priority to all flying type moves. This is such a good ability, absurdly good, because you have priority Roost and priority literal stab moves. This is enough to make up for pretty average stats. This ability is so powerful that it makes up for not only rock weakness, but being overall very weak in other areas. I think the Talonflame hype was a bit overstated early on, when Gen 6 was newer, and the Gale Wings was a flashy new toy. Talonflame was more common and considered better. I think in the modern metagame it's not considered that good. It's still seen occasionally, maybe. But there was a bit of early game hype for this, for sure. Definitely a noteworthy presence in Gen 6 that was unfortunately nerfed from here on. Gale Wings no longer granting priority at all times, it only grants flying type priority if you are at full health from Gen 7 onwards. So this particular Firebird went out with a whimper. In Gen 7 there's once again quite a few fire type OU Pokemon. You'll notice most of them are familiar faces, some rising up after a previous generation not ranked in OU. But there is one new face here, Blacephalon, the Ultra Beast. Another fire ghost type, following in the footsteps of Chandelure, but being a bit more offensively threatening and speedy and powerful than Chandelure was. This is an incredible wall break with an unbelievable 151 base special attack and the ability Beast Boost on top of that, which raises your highest stat by 1 if you attack and KO another Pokemon, making Blacephalon with like a Choice Scarf or a Choice Specs into a snowball win condition that can just repeatedly boost up and defeat everything. Shadow Ball being a fantastic neutral attacking type, Hidden Power Ground, a common choice to hit the Heatrans, and even Trick for some anti-special wall technology, disable a Blissey or something. This is also a set apparently, Ghost EMZ. I mean, Z-move makes a lot of sense on a Beast Boost Pokemon. Hit them with a big nuke and get your ball rolling with the boosts. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Thought I'd give a shout out to Incineroar too, as a new fire type released in Gen 7 that was not very good in singles of course, but became one of the most definitive Pokemon ever made for the doubles format, with its access to Intimidate, Fake Out, Knock Off, and U-Turn, which is just all the best things you want in doubles. And a Fire Dark typing, meaning it's neutral to Fairy, which was noteworthy. I recall that being relevant against Xerneas when that was available in VGC. The Mega Charizards are still the same, still as good as ever, and you can imagine why. You can understand that they're doing very much a similar concept. But here's a familiar face, Victini as OU again. That's fun. Victini's back in action. This was one of my favorite Pokemon to use in Gen 7 because it was really good at punishing common, annoying defensive Pokemon. A cool option that Victini got was Z Celebrate. Celebrate has no competitive use, but when you use it with a Z move, it buffs all of your stats by 1. Usually your 1 per game Z move was spent on the Myriad Beast Boost users or Magearna or something like that to get the ball rolling on one of those KO effects and break through something important, but Victini offered a different way to use your 1 per team Z-Stone on a potentially game-ending boost. And what really makes this cool is stored power, which gives you plus 20 power for each of your stat boosts. You're just boosting every stat, including defense and attack. That's all adding up to a massive base power move, and this really punishes Toxapex and other such fellows. Synergizes well with Tapu Lele and Psychic Terrain, not only granting you Psychic Terrain's priority immunity, but also extra damage on your stored power. And C-Ring Shot is a great move you have access to. A simple 100-100 fire type attack. Beautiful. And something I loved to do in Gen 7 was run Victini with a choice band on it, with that hard-hitting stab V-Create alongside Torkoal, who makes Sun on the field with Drought now. Torkoal got a bit of a buff, a significant buff in fact, with access to Drought. Finally a good new Sunsetter available that wasn't Ninetales. Torkoal has more utility with Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin and much more defense, so a little bit of a boon for the fire type overall. This guy's ranked in ZU, by the way. That can't be right. I used this guy in OU all the time back in Gen 7. I got pretty good results too. But that's false news. Torkoal is a respectable Pokemon. But yeah, Victini in the sun with V-Create. This even 2-hits Toxapex. This is a crazy wall-breaking strategy. I would queue this up, and whenever you see Stall, whenever you see the, Chansey, Mega Sableye, Toxapex nonsense, you know it's an instant victory. You know it's an instantaneous victory. You make Sun, you go Victini, you click the move, and it is over. Even the speed debuff doesn't matter because everything on their team is too slow. You just click V-Create multiple times. There's nothing to be done for them. And Volcarona was of course also enhanced by Z moves, granting it a new way to blow through checks, either with Big Bugginium Z or whatever other coverage it might want. In Generation 8, the Fire type finally got a big win, with the addition of the Boots of course, which grants hazard immunity. Finally no more Stealth Rock to worry about. Imagine that. After all these years, a few years too late maybe, some counterplay to Stealth Rock in the world. Now this made Fire type significantly better, but interestingly, you'll notice that the OU ranked Fire types are all just familiar faces, previously OU ranked fellows. I remember in the early metagame, there was a lot of hype surrounding Moltres, who could now run Boots and function well defensively with a Flame Body set as well. People rejoicing at the fact that Fire types could operate defensively again. Same deal with Rotom Heat, who was quite popular early on, I remember. I guess time wasn't as kind to these fellas, who eventually fell down to UU. Perhaps in a way the addition of Boots was a moment of the rich getting richer, because Volcarona, who already could operate well in OU, one of the few Pokemon that could operate well in OU despite rock weakness, can now sidestep its rock weakness entirely. These three fellas are still as good as ever. It's worth noting that Blacephalon got a bit of an indirect buff because there's no more pursuit to worry about, so no more getting trapped. That's good for Blacephalon. Not so good for Tyranitar. He's out of a job, but Blacephalon isn't concerned about all that, the clown that he is. And there was of course another Ubers ranked starter in Generation 8, Cinderace, who really benefited from the Boots. Hazard immunity is fantastic on a fast pivot Pokemon like this, giving you completely free entry against Stealth Rock and Spikes. And it synergizes very well, of course, with Court Change, Cinderace's signature move that swaps the field effects with the opposing side, kicking all the Stealth Rock, Spikes, and whatever back to your enemy. Kind of like a Magic Bounce type effect, but posthumously. And the icing on the cake of this one, folks, is that Cinderace gets Libero, which is basically the same ability as Protean. Every time you use a move, you change into the type of that move, meaning you get same type attack bonus on all of your coverage, and that is of course extremely strong. And now here we are of course in the present day of Gen 9 OU, where there are many new fire types to talk about. 5 of them are ranked in OU. And I think that some of the non-OU fire types are a bit more relevant than you would expect from their ranking. We of course have the fire-type starter Skeledirge, who was really popular early on, was OU ranked before, with its ability Unaware, ignoring enemy boosts, signature move Torch Song, which is an outstanding move. It has a 100% chance to raise your special attack on hit, which it's like attacking and boosting at the same time, which is fantastic. And it goes through Substitute because it's sound-based. Skeledirge was a great anti-BS Pokemon, especially in a world full of powerful boost sweepers. This guy ignores boost and it goes through substitutes. It was a great choice early on and a fantastic abuser of Terra, allowing you to become a powerful neutral defensive type like Fairy or Water, bolstering your longevity and ability to wall things. Terra Fairy with Skeledirge against threats like Dragoness Dragonite, it was lights out. That's an instant win, especially with access to Will-O-Wisp shutting down physical attack. I think the reason Skeledirge fell down to UU is maybe because many of the powerful stuff it kept in check is now banned, especially Volcarona, who recently got rebanned. Skeledirge was previously one of the better answers to Volcarona in the game, ignoring its boosts of course. But now Volcarona is an Uber's level Pokemon, and I'm sure you can imagine why. it has not only boots, but it can terrestrialize to overcome many more of its weaknesses and get free turns to set up. I think Skeledirge should rise back up, and it had with a similar story to Garganical, who fell down to UU and came back up. Maybe we just need to give it time. Orc Skeledirge is washed, and he's no longer good, and it was hype all along. And he was overrated from the beginning. That could also be true. A lot of powerful traits and solid stats across the board, especially considering the power of this ability. Usually unaware Pokemon have pretty poor stats. These stats aren't the greatest, but considering the ability, I think they are quite good. Iron Moth is another new OU ranked fire type, the future paradox form of Volcarona. And as I've said many times at this point, I'm like a broken record, one of the worst Pokemon names ever conceived. Truly negative levels of creativity on this one. I actually like this Pokemon though, design-wise, like gameplay design-wise. It's not often you see a fire poison type function well. Has really high special attack, but doesn't have quiver dance like Volcarona does, so it feels more reasonable somehow. Booster Energy gives it a temporary stat boost, activating the Quark Drive ability. Thinking you can also run it with heavy-duty boots. Maybe that's a bygone set of another time. I used to see some heavy-duty boots Iron Moth, even with toxic spikes, like a more defensive variant. Probably not as popular in the modern meta, I would imagine. Ceruledge is another new fire type in Gen 9. Pretty interesting set of traits. Yet another fire ghost type. There's 2 new fire ghost types in Gen 9, and this one is more physically oriented. Impressive 125 base attack. Fairly low speed, but Ceruledge has the ability weak armor. So if a physical attack hits you, you gain double speed, lowered defense. This works well with Focus Sash. You can deliberately take like an Earthquake or something, come down to 1. Swords Dance up in the interim period, and then with your other signature move, Bitter Blade. Guess what? You're recovering 50% of the damage dealt, you're high speed, you're boosted up, and it could be over for the enemy. Ceruledge can be an explosive threat with this combo, and it even has the powerful ghost type stab move. Poltergeist, and a form of priority in Shadow Sneak. Another way you can go with Ceruledge is with Flash Fire, and I think it gets bulk up. Yeah, you can do bulk up instead, and go in a more bulky direction. I think this has also fallen out of favor though. I don't see it too often anymore. Sometimes you would see even Terra Bug on this, because with Flash Fire, Bug can actually be a good defensive typing since you erase your fire weakness and you resist ground, which is important. Gouging Fire is Entei with a hat. Isn't that fun? And a bit similar to Mega Charizard X, a fire dragon type physical sweeper. A bit on the bulkier side though, and with heavy duty boots to its name, not needing a Mega Stone of course, it feels a bit better defensively too. Also has the ability Photosynthesis, the new ability for past paradox forms, which grants a boost to your highest stat in the sun, which is really good. You can use this on sun teams too with a choice band set such as this, and in the sun this is extremely hard hitting. This is the only Photosynthesis Pokemon that is also fire type, making it a fantastic fit alongside Torkoal. Speaking of Torkoal, this guy got way better because of all these Photosynthesis Pokemon that benefit from sun now. So sun is a much better archetype in Gen 9, making Torkoal a lot better. And Cinderace, the former Uber level starter Pokemon from Gen 8, is now OU ranked. Feeling a bit more reasonable here, largely because of the nerf to both Protean and Libero, which only work once per switch in now. You can't keep changing your type repeatedly every time you click a move. Now it only changes your type once. And Cinderace is probably the most versatile of the Libero/Protean users because it is a mono fire type. And when you use Pyro Ball, your main stab move, you don't actually activate Libero because it doesn't change your type at all. So you can keep the Libero proc in the back pocket for later, which is useful. Whereas, Greninja is a Water Dark type. So if it uses Hydro Pump, it uses Protean, spends it, and becomes a mono water type instead of Water Dark. And then it can't change to Ice type if it uses Ice Beam, for example, because it already spent its once per switch in Protean type change. But Cinderace is a bit more versatile with it because it's already mono fire. And on top of that, it's just a really good fast threat. One of the more reliable offensive pivots in Gen 9. Very consistent. A bit of counterplay against hazards too with Court Change, which feels better in this meta because Goldengo is everywhere. And Court Change is one of the few hazard removal mechanics that can work against Goldengo. It doesn't get blocked by Goldengo. Helps that Pyro Ball also threatens Goldengo super effectively. That's a good fit here. Now this is the stupidest fire type fish ever done. Chi-Yu existed for a bit, it got banned to Ubers though. This Pokemon is insane. It has 135 base special attack and the ability Beads of Ruin, which lowers the enemy's special defense stat. So the damage output of this thing was absolutely absurd. The metagame with Chi-Yu in it might have been my least favorite metagame I've ever taken part in. The dominance felt in the Chi-Yu metagame was unlike anything I've seen. This guy could also terrestrialize, and with Terra Fire plus Fire Blast plus Beads of Ruin, you could sometimes even 2-hit Blissey. I mean, that's crazy. Even the few things that have fire immunity couldn't withstand Chi-Yu, with Neutral Psychic being able to just 2-hit Duck Spun, which some people thought was a Chi-Yu check. They were lying to you. That wasn't a check, that was more of a sick joke. Ogerpon's Wellspring form was also insane. This was another banned fire type. What was crazy about this guy is that it had Mold Breaker along with a fire type Ivy Cudgel, meaning this could actually not only ignore Unaware, meaning it could power through Dondozo and Skeledirge and such fellas. It could also power through Heatran. You can totally bypass their immunity to fire and hit them with a big fire move, and they're gone. It's actually very overwhelming, this thing. You could also Terra Fire to gain an attack boost. You would lose Mold Breaker in the process, but you would gain extra damage on Ivy Cudgel along with an attack boost on top of that. That could sometimes just give you such offensive firepower, it was a little bit absurd. And of course Magcargo is back in Gen 9. They didn't give this guy any sets yet. The greatest experts of our time are working on it, because there's so much depth and nuance to Magcargo that it has taken this long to even think of one moveset for it, to actually take advantage of all of its fantastic traits. But me personally, I would go Heavy Duty Boots on it. Probably Terra Bug would be the highest impact. You of course do Flame Body. And I'm thinking Lava Plume, Protect, Stealth Rock, and of course, for the Slam Dunk, you have to go with high horsepower, because horsepower is the most valuable resource on Earth. Magcargo needs it more than any of us. And that does it, folks, for fire types throughout the generations. My favorite type in the game. I always pick the fire type starter. I think that fire types create a lot of really awesome Pokemon designs. I like that they have the immunities, the weaknesses. Fire types have personality. They have a flair to them, if you will. And what is your favorite fire type of all time? Let me know down below. Mine is, I think it's got to be Magcargo. Magcargo has earned my respect. Magcargo has earned my loyalty and my respect over the years, and I have to give it to him. I have to say he's the best. But what do you think? Let me know down below, and thank you for watching.